Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here with us. I feel like it's been a while since we've seen you. I'm not sure if that's true or a time warp, but we're really glad to be here with you today. We would love to, hi Sarah, love to see your face. Come on and say hello, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself quickly if you'd like to.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Elizabeth.
I just want to let y'all know that my surgery went well.
Oh, that's great,
Very
Sarah.
good.
That's great news. So glad to hear that. We have a fun chat to get us started today. What is your superpower? I'd love to hear. Please add your superpowers in the chat. And facilitators and panelists, everyone is welcome to add their superpower today. Hi, Christopher. How are you? I could see you.
There we go. There we go. Doing well. Thank you.
Good. Nice to see you.
Same here.
Welcome, Jody. Marcus's superpower is being calm and collected. That's a really great superpower, Marcus.
And it's a very true statement.
Uh-oh, Ryan, be sure to post to everyone. Somehow it came to me.
Amy makes great pies and is a planner. So we'll have to have a pie bake-off sometime, Amy, because I'm a pie baker now too. And it was 3/14 the other day. Did you make a pie for that? For Pie Day? No. Oh.
Hey, let's get this thing kicked off, man. Y'all are interrupting my spring break.
Hi, Todd. Happy spring break. Thank you for joining us. Is that your superpower?
What?
Joining us on your spring break?
That's his
I guess so.
the eagle in him.
I can see you're at a beautiful beach for your spring break, Todd.
Yeah, I wish I was there. I'll tell you that right now.
Ryan says patience is her superpower. That's great. That's a great one too. Charmin says great listener. Sarah's giving Elizabeth a shout out as a great pizza maker. Lots of pie type superpowers. Loving this. Beth can herd cats as a superpower. Wonderful. All right. Well, I know some people are still signing in, and please Todd's superpower is classified. Great. We won't ask, Todd. Please continue to add your superpowers to the chat. We would love to hear them. And like I said, we just want to welcome you back today. We're very excited to be here with you. I know that some of you are on spring break, and I so appreciate you being here while you're on your break. And we have a great panel for you today. So I'm going to go ahead and get us right into it so that we have time to hear from all of our wonderful panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to Lori to welcome us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Or I guess it's afternoon now. It's really nice to have you all here. And Todd, I appreciate that you're on your spring break, so I won't take up too much time. I just want to welcome you, and I want to welcome our panel. I think you guys will really enjoy this. And Beth?
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, thank you for being here. Again, acknowledging that some of you are on spring break. I'm just super excited for today's panel. We have a wonderful group that is going to work with us this afternoon. And I want to just acknowledge the growth that I've seen in this group since we started our LEA this cohort this year. And so super excited to spend the afternoon with you.
Thank you, Beth and Lori. And Amy and I will be facilitating the webinar and panel today. You'll get to hear from Amy in a little bit, and she'll also be introducing our wonderful panelists. So Today, our focus is on taking a deeper dive into using data for program improvement. We're going to have a brief refresher on the data-driven decision-making, or DDDM process that Olga reviewed with you a few months ago. And we're going to talk about why and how to collaboratively look at data with your team. And then, of course, as I said, for the majority of time, you're going to get to hear from a panel of Texas adult ed leaders on strategies for using data for program improvement. And then we'll finish up with a wrap up and next steps. And I just want to say I am recovering from a cold today. I'm going to try not to cough at you all, but if I need to mute myself for a moment, please just bear with me as I do that. So we are going to get started with a brief refresher on that DDDM process. So as you might remember from this webinar, I know it was a couple months ago, but we talked about the data-driven decision-making process and its 5 steps. And to refresh your memories, the steps are: first, know your mission; second, identify data sources; third, organize data; fourth, analyze the data; and finally, draw conclusions. And during webinar number 2 with Olga, we had an overview of looking at that data, and Olga shared a fun mnemonic device with us to help us remember the 5 steps of that data-driven decision-making process. So it was "My sister often attracts drama," MSOAD. And this stands for mission, sources, organize data, analyze data, and draw conclusions. So again, that's "My sister often attracts drama." So we can use that to help us remember the steps of this process. So I'd like to hear from all of you. We're going to launch a poll. And the question is, how often do you analyze data with your staff and instructional team? And you can select often, sometimes, rarely, never, or other. If you do select other, please put it in the chat.
Thanks for sharing. Todd just came up with a new mnemonic for himself.
My significant other attracts drama. Thanks, Todd. A nice variation there. It looks like we have 100% participated. So can we go ahead and share the results? Thank you. So we can see that a lot of you are falling in the more frequent end of the poll. So often or sometimes. We have a couple of rarelies, but no nevers or others here. And thank you for sharing. I want to take a moment and give you a chance to reflect on that answer that you just selected, and start to think about that why behind the answer that you chose. So why do you share data often, or sometimes, or rarely? And then how does that impact your team and or your decision-making process, that frequency? And then what are the pros and cons of looking at data with your team regularly, or on the flip side, rarely? So just take a moment and reflect on the impact of that answer that you chose. And Amy, I can see people writing in the chat. Was there anything important coming through that we need to call out?
Well, folks, I think, are sharing their reflections with you now. So there's folks saying, I guess in response to your why do it, for performance or MSGs, or maybe that's when they do it too, performance testing and MSGs, to show improvement, to help identify goals, to visualize where the program is at in relation to targets and goals.
Great.
So yeah, a lot of good feedback here. Amanda says, I feel the data is analyzed often between a core group, but it doesn't happen often enough with the program as a whole, right? Mm-hmm. So that maybe not everybody is seeing the data, and maybe there's a good reason for sharing more of it more broadly.
Yeah, thank you for starting to reflect and for sharing some of those reflections with us. I want to keep this reflection going, and I'm going to ask you to continue to type into the chat. So what do you think are some of the pros of looking at data with your team? And again, this is general. So what does the team gain or benefit from when you look at data with them? Elizabeth says, knowing where we are. Oh, it's coming through quickly. In terms of goals, Elizabeth adds, okay. Mr. Martinez says, teachers know the metrics for success. Maria adds, able to identify strengths and weaknesses, so both sides of whatever's happening there. Amanda says it gives us a perspective and a big picture view. Staying informed of current program status. Sarah says it helps us to identify improvement or areas of improvement. And Todd
Chira says know the why behind a change, which I love. And Yoliet says transparency.
Yeah, Juliet, can you unmute yourself? I didn't see if you had a microphone today or not. Can you talk a little bit more about that answer of transparency? What do you mean by that?
Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning.
Just the teachers being aware of the administrative side of what we have to work with, and the changes that we have to constantly move and make to meet our goals. And it's good for them to know and be aware of what's happening. Just being transparent.
Yeah, it gives them more information. As you said, it helps them understand, where you are with meeting the goals. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing. Okay, let's look at the other side of this then. So what are some of the cons of looking at data with your team? And go ahead and add your ideas to this one in the chat. Yeah, lots of ideas coming in. So a couple of themes around how much information or having too much information. Both Sarah and Todd said that. Mr. Martinez is highlighting defensiveness on the part of individuals, potentially. Maybe people not understanding the data that they're looking at. Yep, and Charmin echoes that lack of understanding and the too much information as well. Jody says exposes weaknesses. Yeah, Jody, I'd like to hear more about that. And again, I wasn't able to follow all of the chat earlier. So if you were one of the people who said they didn't have access to a microphone today, you can just indicate that. But okay, great. Go ahead, Jody.
Hi, Hayden. Yeah, I think that, when you look at your data, it definitely shows you what your progress is and where your strengths are, but it also exposes your weakest links in your chain, your team. So it will show you your strengths and your weaknesses at the same time.
Yeah, and so some of that then is as a result of knowing that thinking about how we're sharing the data and how we're talking about the data with our programs and with our team. And we're going to get a little bit more into that with a protocol later to help address some of those concerns that come with, well, what happens when you're using data to look at, as you're saying, potential gaps or challenges there. Thank you for sharing. Amy, anything I missed in the chat that you want to call out?
I think you hit on the main points, right? And there's several of them. So I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about why it's a good idea to analyze data with your team. So first, it builds awareness and understanding of team members' viewpoints, beliefs, and assumptions about data while suspending judgments. And this in turn creates a kind of safe zone, so to speak, for team members to reflect on the data without worrying about what the teammates may be thinking about them. It also assists groups in the process of shared meaning making of data, because when we look at data together, we're able to develop a shared or mutual understanding of what that data means. This can help us understand the data more thoroughly or more deeply, or look at it from a different angle too. Analyzing data with our teams also helps to replace hunches and feelings with data-based facts. And this allows for decision-making supported by evidence. Our panelists are actually going to be digging deeper into this idea shortly. Next, it also allows team members to identify and examine patterns and trends of performance indicators. And lastly, looking at data with your team generates root cause discussions that move from identifying symptoms to possible causes, which in turn brings us back to that idea of using data to make decisions. So we can make decisions that help us address those root causes rather than only tackling the symptoms that kind of keep popping up here and there. And Todd said, team effort involved in coming up with solution, 2 heads are better than 1. Yeah, absolutely. And that's that leadership piece here as well, right? Bringing in multiple perspectives and allowing lots of people to be involved in the process of analyzing data. So let's look at this collaborative process of analyzing data together. First, we collect the data, which, as we know, can be many types of data. For example, maybe using the POPs report or looking at specific summative or even formative assessments, or we can consider qualitative data. And then second, we analyze the results. And this is where that my sister often attracts drama, or what did you say, Todd? My significant other attracts drama comes in. So this is essentially where you do the data-driven decision-making process here in step 2. Third, we set team goals based on what the data tells us are the areas of growth. Fourth, we select effective strategies pertaining to how we can accomplish the goals we identified in the previous step. So in other words, how specifically are we going to get where we need to go? And then the 5th and final step is to determine results indicators. And this is where we identify how we will know if whatever we decided to do in step 4 is actually working and to what extent it's working. So this requires that that results indicator is both data-based and specific. So something you can use to guide this process is what we call a data-driven protocol for looking at data, and we're going to share that with you in the chat. I'll give you a moment to grab that, and once it's posted. And as it's getting posted, I'll share that the protocol provides both steps and sample phrases that you can use to help guide the conversation while helping the team focus the conversation on evidence of student progress or identifying gaps. So if you take a moment to open that protocol that Olga just dropped into the chat, you'll see that there's both those conversational stems and also the steps are laid out there for you. It also helps to provide a safe environment that assures that all voices are heard, while also helping everyone on the team become more skillful at examining and discussing data. So this is skill building as well. We're helping our team to develop the skills to be able to engage in this process of looking at data together. And then lastly, and importantly, it keeps the focus of the conversation on facts and data, not people, which can kind of go back to what some of you were talking about in the chat with some potential cons, where one of you, it might have been Mr. Martinez, but I might be misquoting here, said that sometimes these conversations might make people feel personally attacked, or again, I'm paraphrasing Mr. Martinez, you said it much more eloquently than what I'm saying. But by looking at data, we can use the data to help maybe steer away from that focus on individual people and their feelings about it, and instead be focusing on the facts and the data. So now that we've looked at the research and you have this protocol that we're encouraging you to take some time and look at more deeply at a later point, we're going to shift our attention now and hear from those adult education practitioners that you all have been waiting for about how using data for program improvement works on the ground in our adult ed programs. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Amy.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Well, I'm really excited to welcome our panelists. Today, we'll be hearing from Marcus Freeman, Ashley Trevino, and Ryan Lett. It's a bit of a reunion for us because they're Academy grads, and it's really wonderful to have them here to share a little bit about how they use data for strategic planning and decision making, and how they facilitate those conversations with their team. So first, I just want to welcome Marcus and Ashley and Ryan, have you guys come on camera if you would. And just give us a brief introduction, say who you are and what your role is in your agency. Let's start with you, Marcus.
Hello, everyone. Marcus Freeman. As seen there on the screen, I work with Grayson College, North Central. I'm the assistant director, and I work mostly with dealing with the quality of work, quality assurance, if you will, for the program.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marcus. Ashley?
Hello, I'm Ashley Trevino, and I'm the director of the 6th largest, last time I counted, AEL program in Texas. And so we have Collin County, which is close to Dallas, and then 3 counties right north of that, which line up with Oklahoma.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. And Ryan?
Hello, everyone. I am Ryan Lett. I'm a program specialist with Richardson ISD. So I'm a part of a small leadership team. There are only 3 of us. So there's 1 other specialist and then our coordinator who runs the program. So my main focus is curriculum development, but I'm involved in every aspect of running our program.
That's right. You know, in adult ed, we often wear multiple hats. So yeah, thanks, Ryan. So just to talk a minute about the format for our panel, we've prepared some questions for our panelists to get things started that I'll be asking them. But we'll have time at the end also to open it up for questions from our Academy participants. But you can also type your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll try to get to them either at that moment or responding in the chat, or bring them back at the end of the panel to address them. So please feel free to use the chat as we get started. So the first question that I'd like to ask our panelists is, what kind of data are you using in your program to inform decision making? And I'm going to open that up to all 3 of you. I don't know, Ryan, if you want to get us started on that.
Sure. So specifically, of course, we use the data in teams. So we're looking at proxy reports. We're looking at the attendance POPs reports. And then upon entry, when students enroll in our program, we use a lot of that data to inform decision making. So again, demographic data, career interest, and job interest, those fields as well, and as well as identifying our ITPs in the program.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Marcus and Ashley, I want to invite you to share what kind of data you're using to inform decision making as well. And also, you know, if you want to talk a little bit about why that data is important for that, that'd be great.
Marcus, who's going to go?
I was trying to stay muted so you can go first.
Okay, so we use all kinds of data, anything that we could possibly grab as data. One of the things that we do is we have targets that we have to meet for the state. And one of the things we do is run the targets for both grants every single day and send that out. And that kind of keeps us on track. That's an early indicator of like, we might have an issue. We might need to put some extra time in here. Or, hey, this category is good. We can focus our attention on other things. We also really use the average daily attendance in teams to make a lot of decisions. So we might have 20 people registered for a class, and the teacher might see that sign-in sheet and say, I have too many students, but only 8 are showing up every day. And so when you can go in and see like, well, we only have 5 students, we can't really see a need to split the class at this time. We do a lot like that. And we also do surveys. We like surveys. And Marcus, you want to talk about our ILEA survey?
Yes.
Let me get us started. ILEA ISD contacted us, and I don't know if y'all are familiar, but they're pretty rural. It's maybe 45 minutes from here. And they contacted us and said, hey, we'd like to have classes. And I was like, they're so far away and so rural, I can't really see us having a sustainable class out there. And so Marcus, the smart man that he is, said, well, what if we send out an interest survey?
And so with that entry survey, we had that distributed through the school district, and it turned out that we had over 200 students interested in receiving classes in the ILEA community. And so that has helped us out. The why, that kind of helps out with that why, Amy, if you will. Why do you want to provide classes there? Well, we have enough interest. And, it would create a great partnership with ourselves as well as the ILEA ISD community, the school district there. And so they're probably one of the few school districts in our area that we did not have a relationship with. So we're glad to add more so we can reach those targets there.
And if we would have just based it off my feelings of it being rural, we wouldn't have done it. So.
Right. I love that. Right. That the data, you had a feeling or you had a hunch, but the data kind of proved that hunch wrong. And that is a great example, I think, of like where you kind of pause and you say, how can we get more information in order to make a solid decision about this? Marcus, when we spoke, you also talked a little bit earlier when I spoke with you, you talked a little bit about using data on internationally trained professionals. And I'd love it if you would maybe talk about that a little bit and say why that is important to you as a form of data.
Yes, so that's very important. And as Ashley mentioned earlier, we get a report on a daily of the number of students that we are serving in each of the categories that we are tasked with meeting. And so what we've done, we've utilized the POP report to be able to see those, the individuals that have self-reported that they have a degree from their home country. And so we were lacking in that particular area. And so we could go back and use that info, individuals that are already in a program, so they don't have to re-register. We just need to get them funneled into the correct class. And that's going to help us to meet that measure for our intensives.
Great. So we've already kind of started this discussion with, that example of using data to inform practice and the example of the ILEA rural programming. But so I'd like to ask you guys to think for a minute and try to offer us some specific examples, if you can, about how you use data with your team to make those practice or strategic decisions and also to make continuous improvements. Can you give us an example of how you do that or when you've done that? And Ryan, we can go ahead back to you.
All right. Yes, this one, I really like this question because it touched back to my academy project. So one of the things that we use the data for is to evaluate our costs, our spending. So we were looking at our proxy usage and the platforms. And, if you're familiar with the cost of any of those, they're not cheap. So you want to make sure we're spending wisely. So we're looking at the proxy usage and kind of comparing, and what we needed to do. So my leadership or my academy project was that. So through that project, we developed a plan for addressing specifically the questions, our informing questions that we had about why the proxy usage and the data use, the platform usage was low, and what we could do to address it. And we implemented a new curriculum plan, which we developed, and then we were able to compare pre and post data. So before we implemented this plan and then after, and see how those strategies actually impacted the usage of those platforms and whether it was cost effective to continue to purchase particular programs or platforms for usage within our program.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I love that example. And that's really, I think, very detailed, and also is oftentimes an area that we don't think about or talk about, which is kind of using data to justify and make a case for something or not, and in particular the expense of it. Like what is the return on investment, you know, and
Yes.
sort of in a world of limited resources. So I appreciate that. Ashley, how about you? When do you use data with your team, and can you give us some examples of ways that continuous improvement is happening with that?
Absolutely. So we are constantly trying to evaluate and take any feelings out of any decisions that we make, and see like what is really happening here. And I'm reminded of, I had taken over a new team, and there were some things that were going on, and I wanted to change some stuff. And there were a couple of people that were like, Ashley, we don't see your vision. We don't see we don't understand where you're going with this. This is not what we had in mind. And at the end of that year, you guys know at the end of December, the state has us, we have a goal of 65% of our overall enrollment by December 31st. And that year we hit that number. And one of my biggest naysayers, love him, and I love that he brings up all of these questions, was like, okay, all right, I can see it now. I can see it. The data shows that you're right. Even though I couldn't understand it, I understand it now.
Great. So it's a little bit, it ties back to what some of our participants were talking about in the pros and cons, right? Mm-hmm. That transparency, right? Kind of so people can kind of understand the decisions that are being made and how it ties to student success, performance, all that. And also that it sounds a little bit like this, you were kind of beginning to incorporate that into the culture also of this new team. Kind of, let's look at data, let's think about and make decisions using these facts and tools. So Marcus, how about you? How do you use data with your team to inform practice and make continuous improvements?
Yes, can I first of all be defensive for a moment? It wasn't me that was a naysayer. But I love the culture that has been developed in the area that we have. Regarding this particular question here, we share out with with our team members, our part-time instructors and the team. And so they would see the numbers that we would have. And so we would have individuals that would go out on their own and advocate for us to start classes at specific locations in the community. And that just really being a stretch from us, because, you know, we are a small team. I say we're a small team. We only have a few people that, you know, work in those particular areas. So as you bring more people involved that could advocate, you know, they've done that organically. And I love that because it shows the initiative that they have and the passion that they have to continue to keep the services going. And so that has helped us to be able to serve more students than we've ever have within Collin. And so, yeah, that's one of the benefits that we have from sharing this information out, with that transparency for that.
I love that, right? So that, and it sounds like, Marcus, it might have even been a little bit of an unintended benefit, meaning that the data helped members of your community, stakeholders, staff become bigger advocates, it sounds like, for
Yes.
adult ed. And so I love that.
And the
Yes.
shared responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have the admin team worried about the numbers, But when we had an Ask a Director a couple of weeks ago where I was talking about the targets for each grant. And we had people on there saying, oh, have you thought about here? Have you thought about here? I know someone at this to hit this target. And so that helps kind of spread out and holds, makes people feel accountable for the program, even though they might just be part-time teachers.
Right. Absolutely. I love that. There's a lot in that, right? Which is, it's about, it's what you're talking about, Ashley, is empowerment, right? This notion of shared responsibility, shared or distributed leadership, like using data to kind of, to not say, we have the information and this is what you must do, but here's the information and how can we kind of come up with, as Hannah said earlier, kind of get to the root causes and the solutions for things that might be challenging, and also celebrate the good stuff, right? So this third question, you've already begun to talk about it. You guys keep giving me great transitions to the next questions, but how do you get buy-in, or what have you done? And how do you motivate your team to want to use data, right? So like, what are some of the strategies that you use? I mean, thinking back to our discussion in the chat earlier, there are a lot of, challenges to bringing data. Some folks said too much information, right? Like information overload, or now I'm looking at it and I don't know what to do with it. So I'd love to hear from you kind of how you manage this process and kind of get your team motivated to use the data. Should we start with Ryan again?
Sure. This question, it just really kind of touched to me because I struggle with this. And during the academy, this was one of my main questions of like, how do I share that? How do I get that buy-in? And so we did the compass, the leadership compass activity, and discovering, how our preferences affect our group, our leadership, right? And learning about myself just in that activity. And then we did some, breakdown of kind of asking what are the qualities, and then maybe working with the other directional qualities. So I was a West, and, how do I work with the East or North or South? And for me, that was really eye-opening because I love data. I want all the data. I want all the spreadsheets. I want the charts and all of that, where others, I learned, don't necessarily relate in that way. And so knowing the audience, knowing how to approach others on your team with that data. So, breaking it down and making it consumable. So even though that might be my world, recognizing that that's not somebody else's world, but they still need to be able to receive the information that they're being given, the data that they're being given. So being very specific to the audience and making whatever data I'm sharing very consumable, very easy to consume. So it's straight to the point, and then thus can help bring the motivation and the buy-in to what we're talking about.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that so much because you're going back to the tools that we use here in the academy and learning about like our work styles and our preferences, and saying, Ryan, in true West fashion, I love data, but now I realize not everybody does. And how do I kind of present it in a way that is consumable and understandable so that we can get to what the important point is, which is the discussion around it and the what do we do now. So it's the same question for you, Ashley, sort of how do you get the team to use data and feel motivated?
Sure. So a lot of this, and we had talked previously about a really important part of this is being able to build relationships with your team, and having those types of relationships that where you can come and say, hey, I see that there's a breakdown somewhere here. Help me understand where this breakdown is. Help me understand what data we need to gather to figure out what the resolution is. I think by being transparent as a leader in the program, I try very, very hard to be transparent in everything that I do. So our instructors understand why I chose what I chose if I wasn't able to give people input, because I love getting input. But if you can say, well, I made this choice because X, Y, Z. Most people, even if it's not the choice they would have made, are like, yeah, that makes sense. We also have a saying here. We have a saying called, we did the best we could with the information we had at the time. And so it also helps us to like limit regrets based on a decision that we might have made. If somebody had made a decision that was based on feelings and they like, we go through it and it didn't work out, versus, hey, we made a data-based decision. And if it didn't work out, we did the best we could with the information we had at the time.
I really like that. I'm writing that down, Ashley. Thank you. Marcus, do you want to add to that? Sort of how do you motivate and get the buy-in?
Yes. So for myself, the main thing is to model what you're looking for. And, for me, it works best if I have an example in front of me. And so if I can be that example for someone else, that helps out, I believe. Also being patient. You can give the information to someone, but it may take time for them to digest it. They may not be on your same timetable, though we know that we have deadlines and everything within the program. So allowing time for the information to be digested. And then my last thing I would say is try to say it with a smile. And this is me. My resting face can be kind of deterring for some. And so when I have things that I have to address with buy-in, I try not to be seen as fearful, but I try to say it with a smile. And maybe it will be received a little bit more accurately with the intent that I'm needing it to do.
I appreciate that, Marcus. And I think all three of you have really spoken to, how do you set the context and the tone, right? That these conversations are key to kind of the relationship, the approach. And I also heard, Marcus, you sort of talking about, people often need time to process or kind of build their skills around using data, right? That the learning process and doing new things and kind of are developing new muscles. So we need to respect that. And people need to be able to build their confidence through that process, right? And that they will. So I really love that. Thank you guys. I see there's some comments in the chat. Robin's giving you great point, Marcus, patience with a smile. And I want to just pause and see before I ask a couple of other questions, if there's any comments or questions from our participants at this time. And you guys can unmute if you want to and ask any questions you have of our three panelists right now.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the best way? And I know we talked about this in our groups before in our academy, but what is the best way to address in, let's say, an older generation that doesn't want to change, doesn't want to see it?
So Sarah, like the data resistors, is that what you're talking about? Okay, excellent question. Love that, Sarah. So that's for any of you or all of you. Like, how do you deal with resistance?
Is there a need, Sarah? Is there a need for the individual that you're referring to have data?
Yes,
for the position?
Yes, one of my teachers. And they do not want to use the software, even though the software is making us great gains.
You mean like, so they don't want to use the digital learning platform, even though you have evidence that it's effective. And so it's not just, it sounds like resisting the data, it sounds like it's resisting kind of digital learning technologies too, which is a much bigger conversation. But Ryan and Ashley, any thoughts on like techniques for this individual to help kind of move them over?
Well, I was just thinking, we've hired a lot of retired teachers, over the years, and we've encountered this, but it's usually related to the technology component, right? That it's that learning curve. Like, I'm used to pen and paper, I know that, but now I have to learn this new platform and so forth. And so, um, I think it goes back to that patience and kind of understanding. Maybe that's where the gap is that there's that technology need. Maybe once they understand the platform, then moving into the data that you can share from the platform. But that's just my experience. I don't know if it's at first just this is a new a new thing I have to learn, and then I can get into the data. So just that was my thought.
Great. And yeah, sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I would probably sit down that teacher and just say like, hey, tell me about it. What's going on here? Because they might say, I feel overwhelmed by learning the software. Okay, great, we can get you training. Or what is the true underlying issue? They may come to you and say, oh, the internet at my site is terrible, and that's why. Or they might say actionable things that you can say, oh, okay, we can fix that. I had another thought, but I lost it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Ashley and Sarah. There's two other comments in the chat that I think are really good to read. And Olga says, the getting to the why, right? Olga's getting to the why with her comment, asking how can we prepare our students for the jobs of the future if we're not willing to, use the technology, the modern technology, right, in our own classrooms, or model that, right, and prepare them for that, right? Marcus is suggesting maybe doing a partnership with another teacher who is more comfortable, like a coaching or a train the trainer type approach. So those are all great. I'm going to go on for a minute, but Sarah, if you want to comment or add anything else in the chat, do. I want to make sure that we have time to get to our questions, and also you guys should all feel free to put any questions you have in the chat as we go. And I see Elizabeth is posting too. So let me ask a few more questions, and then we'll come back around for audience questions and chat. Oh, and Sarah, again, you provided our transition. What challenges do you have influencing change with your team, and how do you address those challenges, or what works? So we've kind of already, I think, started to really talk about that. Is there anything that you guys want to add to what you've already mentioned in relation to Sarah's question?
I would just say, again, transparency and assuming the best of folks, and genuinely listening and trying to understand where they're coming from and why they're resistant.
Yeah, I do really like that, Ashley. So it's that like open conversation, right?
What if it's like, we've always done it this way. It works. I don't need the other stuff, and I don't want to learn the other stuff.
So there is a point now, I get really sad, but there has been a point in time where I'm like, folks need to get on the Ashley bus or exit. And so I have gotten to that point with just a couple of people. They just did nope. And well, lesson plans are required. Content standards are required. You are required to do it as a part of the job. And right. Unfortunately, if you absolutely refuse to lesson plan, that's a grant requirement. Right. But that's so rare. That happens very, very rarely, but it has happened.
So, and Ashley, I appreciate that. Those, like, as we move into leadership, those are some of the difficult conversations that we need to manage as leaders, and they're never easy, and we don't like to get there. But so that's a little bit of the stick that Ashley's talking about. The carrot, is, we can think a little bit too, I think, around carrots for this, right? So, and I think the three of you sort of have talked to me in the past about what some of those carrots might be in kind of influencing change around behaviors. I know that some of you have talked about celebrating success. So lifting up and amplifying the work that people are doing in that space, their coworkers, as a way to say, hey, look at this great thing that's happening over here. Don't you want to be on this train? right? Are there other ways that you can incentivize or celebrate success or uplift it? Ryan or Marcus or Ashley?
Well, those same data reports that I've used to implement or require the change are the same ones that we can use to uplift. So, I know sometimes our instructors, they do hold themselves up to a very high standard, and then, oh, I'm not meeting the mark, or no, look at the data. We were here and now we're here. You're doing great. So that same that same report can work in their favor, and just showing, like, look how well what you're implementing or what we're doing is impacting that data.
Right. I appreciate that, Ryan. So remembering that it's not, using the data to show impact and celebrate success, even if there's small benchmarks or milestones toward a bigger goal, like those smaller successes. Great. And I see Amanda posted something interesting. Amanda, do you want to come on and tell us about this?
Sure. This was something that the program did years ago, and when leadership changed, it stopped. And so I'm trying to bring it back in, but we had data detective meetings maybe twice a year, and we're a very large program, so we would do it in different groups. So we might have everyone from a particular site bring the data for their class individually and work as a team to see how that site is doing. But we also had multiple sites represented in that particular meeting, so we could kind of compare and see who was doing things well. I'm a visual learner, so the color coding, excuse my cat that's meowing in the background. I just loved the red, yellow, green stoplight approach. Here's where we're really, failing. Here's where we're doing great. And as a instructor at that time, it was just extremely eye-opening, and helped me to see how I fit into the big picture of this huge goal of the programs, and looking at how I can improve my class. So
I love that, Amanda. I love that example. And if you have like an old one of those that you marked up that you could take a picture of and share with our academy, I think having a visual of that would be amazing. I love that. And thanks for sharing that technique. And I see that Elizabeth says that they started a reward program this month for instructors and students to motivate them. So again, like going back to that, influencing change and sort of what are some of the tools in our toolbox for doing that. These were wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add one more. I love to use a pilot. So sometimes before something needs to roll out across the program, or, one class, one teacher, let's pilot it and see, and if there's any adjustments, and how does that data impact that class? And then you might have that instructor buy in to roll it out to more classes or across program wide. So sometimes even before starting large, I would love to say, let's just pilot it small, and a pilot means we can adjust.
Yeah. And I think that, Ryan, I love that advice. And I think this also goes to the academy improvement projects and plans, and some of what we talk about here in the academy, which is that sometimes making change and making improvements is just about that. It's saying, let's start with a smaller pilot, see how it goes. That helps us get buy-in. It also helps us to learn. And then we have like our core group that we can help with scale messaging and supporting that scaling. So thanks for that, Ryan. And that kind of gets to this last question here, I think, a little bit, Ryan, which is, what's your advice for someone starting this process of collaboratively looking at data with their teams? And I'd love it if the three of you could help us help our practice academy here think about kind of what's some advice for us as we start this process.
Are we skipping the focus on improvement question?
You can, I was going to, because I kind of feel like you guys hit on that a little bit, but
Okay.
Ashley, go back to it go back to it, Ashley.
I wrote notes.
Good,
over here.
so go for it. So start with that one, Ashley.
I'm so sorry to get us off.
No
but
worries.
This is the one I was most excited about.
Cool.
Okay, so again, building relationships and building trust. Oh, I love the kitty. Oh, kitty, kitty. Okay, having those interactions with your instructors or your team to say, and being genuinely curious. So not coming in saying, I know the answer to this and you need to do X, Y, Z. But building those relationships so that when you do come to them and trust, they can hear what you're saying. And then I'm huge on assuming the best. Assume the best of your team at all times. Our teachers are amazing, excellent teachers. And if something goes wrong, I assume that there was a miscommunication, there was a technology issue, there was something that happened that caused this. Not that the teacher is lazy or doesn't care or that. So I think that is huge, because when you can come in with the assumption that they're doing their best, if you notice a problem, you can come in and say like, hey, I've noticed this. Help me understand what it might be. And it could be something very easy to resolve that you would have never thought of because you weren't there to know what the issue was. I think it really helps to create a culture of acknowledging that we all have room for growth. So Marcus and I will often, if somebody's presenting, we take notes on how each other can improve during our presentation, or just saying like, hey, I struggle with this too, or this is a strength of yours and it's a weakness of mine, and just kind of being open like that and not being like, I'm here on my pedestal, I do everything right, I have all the right ideas, and you need to listen to what I do, but saying, we all have room for improvement. I definitely do. And then really being opening to listening, to listening to what they have to say. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but often when people feel heard, even if you made a choice that they wouldn't have made, if they feel like you heard them and you took their input into consideration, they're often much more agreeable to whatever it is that you're trying to sell them, if we're talking about buy-in.
Yep. And I appreciate that, Ashley. And, we've done some of that, practicing feedback and kind of like how to lead in communications in a way that like opens up the space and kind of can reduce the emotion in those discussions, especially if they're difficult. So I really appreciate that, and kind of you pointing to kind of creating that culture and that tone within your team. Ryan and Marcus, you can feel free to speak to that one or give your advice.
Yeah. So for number 2, how do you keep the focus on improvement? Just that. So make a deposit before making a withdrawal. And so if you're focusing on items that need improvement first, the individual, the receiver of that message, can take that defensively. So if you can make that deposit, hey, we're working great in this area, make that deposit first before you identify the other areas of improvement. And though the receiver may know what you're doing, it helps out because it identifies, I don't have to back up because I'm showing something negative. I want you to understand that we see the growth and we see what you're contributing. And that's what the deposit comes in, giving something positive before addressing the areas of improvement.
Great.
What a smile.
Thanks, Marcus. So Ryan and our panelists, kind of last thoughts on your advice, for our new leaders that are beginning kind of this process of, developing a data decision-making culture with their team, and certainly around their improvement projects.
Yes. One thing I like using is definitely using a collaborative platform, right? So something like Google Docs or Sheets, when you're building that data or sharing that. So it's something that I can work on with my instructor as well. I'm giving certain data, and then they're adding data so that we can see whatever it is that we're trying to evaluate. So that kind of helps them focus on collecting what is important, and then us showing that, and then it's kind of built together. So that collaborative environment where we're editing and looking at it together. Specifically, an example is recently we started really focusing on the GED Ready score reports, because we were looking at our HSC program. And so building a document where they were able to then start putting in those score reports and really seeing the placement of the students. It's something that's been helpful. So just that collaborative environment, whatever data they can collect and share and we can work on together. And then two, I was just thinking about keeping that focus on improvement. And sometimes, if we're sharing program data by class, removing the class name or just putting a, class A, B, C, but not specifically being able to identify it, kind of removes that element of the gotcha or that finger pointing. I think I mentioned it earlier, the personal attack. It's take that away, knowing that there may be some out there who already feel that way about data, and then to see it on the board and I'm the lowest one, or the class that's the struggle, to maybe take that element away of being able to identify it, and then it just puts the focus strictly back on the data and then that improvement.
Right. I really appreciate that, Ryan. So in having a discussion about looking at data for improvement strategies, kind of areas for strategic thinking, or, in need of more attention from the team, trying to spot trends, right, as opposed to like call out individuals. And it's not to say that that wouldn't be a one-on-one conversation, Ryan, right? Like would you, Ryan, maybe have the kind of big conversation, but still if there was an individual teacher that was really kind of in question, you'd have that as a side conversation? Okay.
Yes, right.
Okay, great. Ashley and Marcus, in our last couple minutes here, any other advice or
I have asked a lot of questions. So what's the objective? What are we looking for? Are we looking to increase the class attendance? Are we looking to see if it's the right day and time? Know what you're looking for, and when you gather your data, and ask yourself, is this a one-time issue or is this an ongoing issue? If it's a one-time issue, maybe we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction and change a policy or process for something that happens once every 5 years. But if it's an ongoing issue, what is that issue? Is it a training issue? Is it a policy issue? Is it a procedure issue? Is it a resource issue? And that kind of depersonalizes it from saying to the teacher, you're not doing this correctly, but where are we and what's the framework surrounding this so you can be successful, because I know you want to do a good job for your students.
Absolutely. I love those questions, Ashley. Can you put those in the chat for us right now?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I love those. Marcus, last word on the advice, and then I'm going to open up for questions from our group.
Yeah, so as an instructor, GED instructor and ESL instructor, during one of the trainings, there was I've learned that we find ourselves repeating the same information. And that would be my advice. Don't get tired of repeating what you're needing and what you're looking for until the individuals actually get it. Because once again, it may take time. So do not get frustrated with the repetition.
Right. Appreciate that, Marcus. And understanding that, the learning process does take time, right? And that kind of support that you're talking about, Marcus, where, we need opportunities to learn and develop and grow over time, and kind of the support, whether it be in reminders, information, trainings, questions to do this work. Yes. Love that. Thank you so much. Well, all right. So I am going to take some questions now from our group. Any questions that you have? Invite some of you, maybe Elizabeth. Is it Hannah, you're posting Elizabeth's question?
Yeah, Elizabeth had posted a question earlier and I just didn't want it to get lost. So I reposted it for you.
Great. Elizabeth, do you want to come on and ask your question of our panelists?
Hello, everybody. Yes, my question was that, we gather data, and I was asking if it's better to ask, for example, the instructors, the team, to bring their own data, or to ask them how do you gather that data to see if they know where to go, or should we bring the data to a meeting and provide the data already, to them? What is the best way to approach that information? That.
It's a great question, Elizabeth. And I imagine it would really depend upon what you're looking at or asking for, but let's let our panelists speak to that.
So this is Marcus again. I would suggest to find out what knowledge they have first, if you will, because it may be that you may not need to go over everything. And so assessing the knowledge that they have, you can go back and fill in the gaps. So asking, where did you get the information? You can ask that as a supplemental question, if you will, but I try to be very strategic and with my words, because I do not want people to go on a defensive, because I know that what I'm communicating won't be received. So assessing their knowledge first will help you to have a better understanding of what gaps that they may have. And then you can ask some of those other questions later. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. We, at the beginning, we were talking about when we present the data, sometimes people take offense, because the data might show that they're not showing improvement, or they're lacking, whatever we want to get. For example, if we want to get students to show progress and we have instructors not showing improvement, their students, they might get it like something that is offensive for them, or we're trying to tell them they're not doing their job. So if we ask them to bring the data, that way they already know what is in their own data. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So for us, we have about 60 part-time people. And so Maria, Lori, close your ears. Okay. Not all of our part-time people have access to Teams. I can't even imagine training everybody about how to run their own reports in addition to our, right? So we have the data. I think a big thing, we bring the data to the teachers. Our big thing is, here's the data, but we're not going to assume we know why when we approach them, right? So like they might say to you, our room is so cold that students leave early, or we have no internet, or there might be things that you don't know, right? So you see the data, but you don't know why yet. And so having that conversation to say like, so here's what I'm seeing, help me brainstorm some stuff. Like, why do you think that this is happening? And, we've had really big success doing that, assuming the best, assuming that everybody wants to do a good job and wants to teach the best that they can. And so that's really helped for us, but we provide the data.
Yes, thank you.
Maria,
my other question, thank you. My other question would be then, should I do a meeting, for example, with each instructor separately, or should I have a meeting with all the instructors?
It would depend on your objectives. So if you were seeing we're looking at trends, and if you see a teacher that most of the program is doing well, and a couple of stragglers are in a couple of areas, I would meet with those folks more one-on-one. If it were the entire program is struggling with something, for the most part, then I would do more of a program or group training. But I would be careful. Ryan had a really great idea about masking the data so that people aren't sitting there thinking like, oh, well, I'm the lowest and everybody knows that I'm the lowest in this room. So like maybe training how to read the data in the meeting and then sending their data to them individually by email.
Okay, I like that idea. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that you guys have the opportunity in this meeting to kind of share, not just like, what are some strategies, but really start to unearth and say, how do you do it? How do you do it? Right. And start to compare those notes. Are there any other, in our last couple minutes, are there any other questions or anything that our Academy participants want to ask or know from our amazing panelists? Well, okay. Well, I want to send a big, big, big thank you to our 3 panelists. Let's give them a virtual round of applause. It's such a pleasure having you guys back and seeing you. And I think I speak on behalf of TCAL, TWC, and all of us in the academies when we say we really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your wisdom with us today. And thank you so much. And hopefully you'll come back again next year. So we'll see you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead on.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to go ahead on and talk just for a minute to the Academy folks now about next steps, just to remind you where we are and what's coming up. So you have rounded the corner on the Academy. We will have our last session on April 22nd. And that's, hard to believe. When we started this, it felt like we had all this time, and now here we are at the end of the Academy. So what you're going to need to do now is update your PowerPoint presentation, your improvement project PowerPoint presentation, and post it in the portal by April 8th. You guys have done most of the work on those slides already. You prepared them for the small groups, although you may have some additional information you want to add there or some changes that have been made since our small group meetings. But the big work here is to add 2 additional slides to that PowerPoint deck. One will be on your outcomes so far and any data you've collected on your improvement project, anything you want to report on. And then the second slide is really focused on lessons that you've learned and challenges that you've had along the way. We know that as you start to dig into improvement project and change work, things come up all the time, things you didn't anticipate, things that kind of take us sideways sometimes. So we want to hear about those lessons learned and the challenges and whatever's going on with your project as part of the final presentation. You're going to prepare to present that full slide deck on April 22nd. So before we wrap up, I just want to make sure there are no questions about what comes next or about your presentations. Anything, anybody? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking. So before we go, very quickly, I'd love for you to just post in the chat 2 reflections or 2 takeaways from today's webinar, today's learning on the panel. Tell us what you heard today that is a takeaway or a learning for you. Jody says ADA reports to make decisions. Yeah, that was great. Average daily attendance reports. Yep. Oh, that's my dog. Sorry.
Amy, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Elizabeth says how to approach data and how to present it to my team. Amanda, assume the positive, not negative. Yeah, I love that one, Amanda. I need to work on that sometimes. Lewis says establishing a trustworthy relationship. Todd, I have to agree on the ADA. Great. So that was something new with it today, Todd. Excellent. Say it with a smile. Sarah says, Christopher, that not everyone assigns the same level of value to data, right? Absolutely not, Christopher. And that, that's kind of part of thinking about leading these data conversations. Lori, calm and cool is the best way to approach folks with sensitive data. Patience, brainstorming, right? Yep, the approach that you're going to use, Yoliette. Heidi says, when it comes to making decisions based on data, you get the buy-in from others with patience and a smile. As a last resort, you have to ride the Ashley bus, meaning it's my way or the highway. Wonderful. And Lewis says, ask the team to explain the data to me. Yep. I love that technique. What do you see here, right? These are all great. Charmin, utilizing data more intentionally when deciding on purchasing decisions and having a data session with my instructors. These are great. A lot of takeaways today. We appreciate our panelists for that. So with that, I'm going to adjourn us and say thank you guys for being here. We'll see you on April 22nd, and enjoy your spring break if you're on one or you have one upcoming. And we'll see you soon. Bye. Thanks, everyone.